In this video, I review the XferMax X8, a fast and portable media card backup device. I also provide an operational guide of sorts, because while the included manual is a good quick start guide, it's a bit lacking on details, so I had to use trial and error to discover XferMax's full functionality. There are 3 models of the X8, each ending with a unique letter suffix that loosely targets Sony, Canon, and Nikon shooters based on the types of media cards they would typically use. I'm reviewing the X8S model. All 3 models support a healthy array of storage options for backing up your media cards. By design, the primary backup medium is a 2.5-inch internal drive bay, which can accommodate either an SSD or a spinning disk. There's also a USB 3.0 port, which supports pretty much every type of external USB storage device, including SSDs, spinning disks, memory keys, and even other media card readers. It also supports USB hubs, which allows you to attach multiple devices to its single USB port. XferMax is extremely flexible about moving your data across all those interfaces. You can copy files between any 2 attached storage devices, internal or external, and even copy data directly between media cards. Connectivity for transferring files to your computer is provided via a USB 3.0 micro B port. There's also a dedicated micro USB charging port. Wi-Fi is implemented for remotely browsing and transferring files from your smartphone using a free iOS app available in the Apple App Store. I couldn't locate an equivalent Android app in the current Google Play Store, although I did find a reference to it in Google's cache, so I'm not sure if the app is only temporarily unavailable or if it has been permanently removed. Setting up the XferMax is easy but requires a bit of a shopping list to get started, because the only included accessories are a micro B USB cable for connecting your external storage devices and a micro USB cable for charging. It does not come with a USB wall charger, batteries, or storage. There's a paper insert included in the box explaining why, but at $499 I think the manufacturer needs to reconsider and include these necessary items with the base unit. First, you'll need to buy 2 1860 flat top batteries. When prompted, the manufacturer suggested the Panasonic NCR 18650B, which I purchased from Illume.com. Be careful to buy the batteries from a reputable source because apparently there are a lot of counterfeits. The batteries can be charged internally via the micro USB port using a USB wall power adapter, which is the second item you'll need to purchase since one is not included in the box. And as I learned, you have to be very selective about which USB power adapter you use. When I first received my XferMax, I caused a serious mishap by running it on USB wall power alone. At the time, I hadn't received my batteries yet, so my Anchor Power Port 2 was providing sole power to the device. When I attempted to upgrade to firmware, my XferMax hung up in the middle of the update, making high-pitched squealing noises. That hang resulted in a corrupted firmware image, which required obtaining a set of recovery files from the manufacturer to restore. Power from the adapter alone supplied enough current to enable the XferMax to boot up, but apparently not enough for writing the firmware image to the internal flash, and unfortunately this only became apparent after the firmware update process had hung. Further testing revealed that XferMax is quite finicky about which USB power adapter you use. It was very unstable with my high-quality Anchor Power Port 2, even though it's rated for up to 3 amps at 5 volts, well above the 2 amp minimum specified in the manual. Here's a demonstration of the XferMax hanging up when I navigate around the file browser while using only the Anchor as the power source. I've set up my microphone so you can hear the high-pitched noises when it hangs up. And here it is hanging up another time while simply shutting down. In contrast, the unit operates fine with my RavPower 2A 6-port charger, as well as a 1.8 amp Amazon Fire tablet charger I also had on hand. Moral of the story? Be sure to test whatever power adapter you use before performing any critical functions like firmware updates or backup operations. Better yet, always operate the unit with the batteries installed and charged, which should eliminate any quirky dependencies on specific USB chargers. It would be nice if the unit had a power circuit that warned users when the supplied power is insufficient, or short of that, if they included a compatible USB adapter with the unit. The last item on the shopping list is a 2.5-inch SATA storage drive, either SSD or spinning disk. Since this is a portable device, I recommend an SSD. That way you won't have to worry about vibration or movement affecting the reliability of your backup drive. As of this review, SSD prices have dropped to below $1 gigabyte, so a 1TB SSD will run you less than $100 on sale. I tested a variety of SSDs, including a Samsung 128GB 830 EVO and a 1TB SanDisk SSD Plus. The manual states SSDs up to 1TB and spinning disks up to 4TB are supported. To install your drive, remove the back cover and retention clip inside the internal storage bay and then insert the drive. Like all planar SATA connections, you won't hear a reassuring click to let you know the drive is fully installed, so you'll need to press back firmly to ensure a good connection. The retention clip is meant to snap over the drive and into the holes underneath the storage bay, but I found it wouldn't fit with a full-size 2.5-inch drive in place. This is unfortunate because without the clip there's a bit of lateral wiggle of the drive inside the bay. I solved this by fashioning 2 shims from folded pieces of paper, placing one on each side of the drive near where the retaining clip would be. With the batteries installed and charged, power the unit on by sliding and holding the power switch for 3 seconds. This represents one of my few ergonomic gripes. Sliding and holding the power switch is a bit of a hassle, particularly if you have a device installed on USB port because it leaves little room to position your fingers to manipulate the switch. It takes approximately 23 seconds to power up, after which you'll reach a home screen of colorful icons representing each of the XferMax's functions. You'll want to immediately format the newly installed internal drive. Pre-formatted drives including a variety of file systems are supported, but I found it performs best when you format the drive inside the unit, which utilizes the exFAT file system. The drive can be formatted by going to Settings, Format HDD, and then HDD. After formatting is complete, there is an involuntary shutdown, so you'll need to power it back on to get started. Before diving into the features, I'll take a moment to comment on ergonomics, which are actually quite good. Although the 3.5-inch color display has no touch support, the array of buttons below the display make navigation easy and have a solid and reassuring feel. They include a directional pad, plus home, back, magnify, and context menu buttons. The context menu button is the most useful. Press it anywhere in the interface to get a pop-up menu of actions customized for where you are. Navigating around XferMax's interface is surprisingly intuitive and fast, with virtually no lag. It's actually quite an enjoyable experience, as odd as that may sound for such a utilitarian device. The LCD is 3.5 inches with a resolution of 320 by 480. The display is rather dim and low in contrast, but workable for indoor use. There's also a 2-line, full-time monochrome LCD that shows progress indication while performing a backup, and internal drive capacity info when the device is idle or powered off. The XferMax is comfortable to hold and rather light at 12 ounces or 345 grams, which includes batteries and the internal SSD drive. Single-handed operation is certainly doable. Now I'll dive into the XferMax's backup functionality. First up is the full backup feature, which performs a full non-incremental backup to the internal drive. When you click on full backup, you'll see a graphical depiction of all inserted media cards and attached USB storage devices, showing their used and available capacity, along with the used and available capacity of the internal drive. There's no way to select which media cards or USB devices are backed up. The unit will back up every card and device it finds, so you control what is backed up by what you insert or attach before initiating the backup. Pressing the menu button brings up a few options. Preview determines whether thumbnails of images copied during the backup are displayed on the LCD. It won't preview every image since the files are copied too quickly to see them all. Instead, it'll show a random sampling of images as the backup progresses. Speed has 2 options, normal and high, and defaults to high. It's not clear what functionality is different between the two, although based on the much lower performance of the normal mode, I'm guessing it uses a copy with verify operation during the backup versus a copy without verify for the high setting. The next option is folder name, which determines the naming of the folders on the internal drive that will hold the backup. The default is sequence mode, which uses a folder name comprised of the media type prefix, for example ST or XQD, followed by a sequence number that auto-increments after every backup. For date mode, the folder name uses the same media type prefix, but is followed by a date stamp for the year, month, and day of when the backup is started. The last option, classified by date, creates a top-level folder name consisting of the year, month, and day of the backup, underneath which are subfolders using the sequence mode naming convention. The next option is log file, which I assume is intended to create a log recording the list of operations and files that are backed up, but when I attempted to use this feature, the unit fails to proceed with the backup and just stalls. Verify presumably performs a write with readback verify for the backup file copy operations, whereas a non-verified backup does straight unverified copies. The default setting for verify is off. The last option is ignore error, which defaults to 10 times and has options for 30 times and 50 times. I didn't have any faulty cards on hand to test this option, but I assume it's a threshold for how many I/O errors are permitted before a backup is canceled. Pressing start initiates the backup. While the backup is running, there's a progress screen showing the number of files remaining and their total size, along with a running transfer speed and estimated time to completion. It also displays the current file being transferred and the destination folder created to hold the backup. You can change the folder name while the backup is in progress by pressing the menu key. If preview was enabled, you'll also see thumbnails from a random selection of files being copied. You can optionally cancel the running backup by pressing the back key. Doing so will not delete the files already copied onto the internal drive up to that point. After the backup completes, the cumulative transfer statistics are displayed for each card and device that was backed up, and you're presented with the option to either browse the copied files into the destination folder or to safely eject the media cards. The completed status of the backup is also displayed on a 2-line monochrome LCD, and this status will remain displayed even if the unit later turns itself off from the power-saving idle timer. This means you can start the backup and then walk away without having to babysit the unit to confirm the backup was successful. You can instead simply look at the 2-line LCD for confirmation. And in case you overlook the completion status on the 2-line LCD display, you'll also be presented with a message on the main LCD the next time the unit is powered on, which will show you the result of the previous session's backup with the same statistics and options presented when the backup originally completed. This is a very nice touch and demonstrates the level of thought put into making the interface useful and intuitive. Note that each full backup will store the copied contents into a unique destination folder, the name of which is controlled by the folder name option discussed previously. For example, if you perform a second full backup using the same inserted media cards, the files will be recopied into a separate, unique folder name. This could be useful if you want to create multiple copies of your files for extra protection against future media errors on the internal drive. Keep in mind you're not limited to backing up just images and video. The backup will copy any file it finds. That means XferMax can be used as a general-purpose backup and mirroring utility, particularly with its wide support of device types, including USB thumb drives. Backup performance is excellent. With the Verify option off, the sustained transfer rate for a Sony 64GB XQD 2.0 card to the internal SSD was approximately 150 megabytes per second for my mix of Nikon Z6 and Z7 RAWs and movie files. Backup performance with the Verify option on for the same XQD card dropped from 150 megabytes per second to 40 megabytes per second. SD performance was slightly less at 125 megabytes per second with Verify off, using a Delkin 64GB UHS-2 card rated for 285 megabytes per second. With Verify on, the rate of the SD card dropped to 36 megabytes per second. To give you an idea of how the XQD performance relates to completion times for your backups, that's about 150 Nikon Z7 14-bit lossily compressed RAW images per minute, or 300 Z6 RAW images per minute. For video, that translates into about 10 minutes of 4K footage transferred per minute, or about 86 minutes of 1080 footage transferred per minute. Unfortunately, I didn't have any CFast cards on hand to test, but considering the XQD card maxed out at 150 megabytes per second, even though it's rated at 440 megabytes per second, I think it's fair to assume that CFast would have similar performance. Backup performance of a SanDisk Extreme 64GB USB thumb drive was 132 megabytes per second with Verify off. Performance from a SanDisk 256GB T5 USB SSD was 136 megabytes per second. Battery life is excellent. The manufacturer rates the XferMax at 1 terabyte of backups per charge, and in my testing, the unit exceeds that. I did a control test of 55 backups to the internal SSD, each approximately 12 gigabytes in size, split evenly between an XQD and SD card, and reformatting the internal SSD after every 120 gigabytes. The total backed up capacity was 600 gigabytes with a power on time of 1 hour and 42 minutes. When done, the battery still had more than 50% of their charge remaining. I should take a moment to mention thermals as well, particularly for the internal 2.5-inch storage device. There isn't any real ventilation within the storage bay outside of small cutouts on the rear door. This means the internal drive can get rather toasty. After about 30 minutes of continuous power on usage, I measured a surface temperature on the Samsung 830 EVO SSD at 126 degrees Fahrenheit in a room with an ambient temperature of 75 degrees Fahrenheit. This may be within the operating specifications of the drive, but it's still warmer than I'd like to see. The media cards get very toasty as well, especially the XQD cards with their metal casings. The incremental backup is the same as a full backup, except only new files that don't already exist in the most recent backed up destination folder are copied. You can create your initial baseline backup by either doing your first incremental backup or by doing a full backup. For the latter, be sure to use the same folder name option for the full backup as you do for the incremental. Otherwise, the incremental backup will ignore the full backup files and perform a full backup itself. The time backup is the same as the incremental backup, except it creates a hierarchy of subfolders organized by the date of the backed up files. This is useful for those who prefer to organize their photos by date. Note that unlike the full backup and incremental backups, time backups are rooted in the date subfolder on the internal drive, whereas the previous two types are rooted in the backup subfolder. This means files for time backups are separate and distinct from those of the other two backup types. Due to the way the files are organized by date, the folder name option is ignored for time backups. The last backup option is dual backup, which is the same as a full backup but done simultaneously to both the internal drive and an external device connected to the USB 3 port. For dual backups, you'll generally want to attach the micro USB power wall source in addition to the internal batteries, since the power draw of writing to two SSDs and/or HDDs at the same time might exceed the capacity of the batteries alone. One quirk about dual backup is how the XferMax distinguishes between a USB drive that is to be backed up, meaning a source drive, versus one that holds the backup, meaning the destination drive. You would expect that any device plugged into the USB port for dual backup would be treated as the destination drive, since the role of this feature is to back up to both the internal drive and the USB attached device. Instead, XferMax decides the role of the drive based on its capacity. If it's above 500 GB, then it's treated as a destination drive. But if the capacity is below 500 GB, then the drive is treated as a source drive, which means the software will think no second destination drive is available and the dual backup will not be allowed to proceed. I suppose this was done in case you have multiple USB drives attached via USB hub to help differentiate between what needs to be backed up versus where that backup will be placed. However, it would be nice if the software had logic that assumed a single attached USB device should always be treated as a destination drive, or even better, a method to specify each USB drive as either a source or destination. Because there are two destination drives involved in the backup, the sustained transfer performance is cut in half from 150 megabytes per second to 75 megabytes per second when backing up from an XQD to SSD drives. The sync feature lets you copy files from the internal drive onto an external USB device, providing an easy way to duplicate your accumulation of internal backups to an additional backup drive. As the name implies, sync operates in an incremental fashion, only copying files that haven't already been transferred on a previous sync invocation. This makes it easy to keep that external copy of your backup up to date. As with dual backups, you'll want to consider using the micro USB wall power source for sync backups, since powering two devices simultaneously may exceed the power current capacity of the batteries alone. The XferMax software actually warns you about this when you attempt to start a sync without the micro USB power source attached. Oddly, it does not provide the same warning when you perform a dual backup. The Files browser functions as a file manager and image viewer, allowing you to view, list, create, copy, rename, and delete folders and files on any of the attached storage devices and media cards. You'll rely heavily on the menu button for this feature, as it provides the context-sensitive options available for the item selected. For example, if you press menu on the top-level storage device, you'll have the option to view its full properties, including the device type, serial number, total and available capacity, and file system type. Pressing menu on a subfolder and selecting properties displays the total number of files within that folder and the capacity they occupy. The menu options for folders and files also offer a multiple selection mode, where you can select multiple folders or files to target an operation on. After selecting your items, press menu again to perform an action on that selection, such as delete to remove the files. You can also use this feature to copy files between any two storage devices or media cards. First, select the files or folders you want to copy, then press menu and choose copy. Then navigate to where you want to copy the files to and press menu again and select paste. The unit will perform a copy with verify operation between the source and destination locations. A faster option for copying files specifically to media cards from the internal drive is to navigate to the folder on the internal drive and select Copy to Card, which will perform a copy without verify from the internal drive to the inserted media card. The browser provides 3 display modes for files, switchable via the magnify button. The first is a list view, which shows the file names, date stamp, file size, and small thumbnail. The second mode is a large thumbnail view, which shows a thumbnail, file name, and file type. The final display mode is the small thumbnail view, which allows you to view a large collection of images at the same time. You can choose the sort method of the file listing by pressing menu and then sort by. You can also filter by file type to show only image files or only JPEGs or only RAW files. The top-level view of the browser includes 3 folder shortcuts. One is for the base backup folder that's used for full and incremental backups. The second is a time folder that's used for time backups. And finally, a favorites folder where you can add images to the folder by pressing the menu button on any image in the file browser and selecting favorite. Doing so will copy that image to the favorites folder. This can be used as a rudimentary image rating system, allowing you to quickly locate your favorite images when you later connect the XferMax to transfer the images to your desktop or notebook. Pressing the center button on the direction pad on a selected file brings up the image viewer. The default magnification is fit to view. Pressing the magnify button cycles through the magnification levels of 25%, 33%, 50%, 66%, 100%, and 150%. Press the back button to return to the fit to view. Pressing the direction pad's center button provides a one-click shortcut to 100% magnification. While in any magnified view, use the direction buttons to pan around the image. Panning, however, is a bit slow and clunky. You can optionally rotate the view of images by pressing the menu button on an image and then choosing rotation. This only affects the presentation of images on the screen. The underlying image files are not rotated. Pressing on the direction pad's up button shows the image metadata. Pressing the down button shows the histogram. The image viewer appears to support most types of image files, including RAW images. I assume it's using the JPEG that most cameras embed into their RAW files, rather than the XferMax rendering the RAW file itself. The viewer does not support high-efficiency image files, which is the type of files used by current iPhones. Also, the viewer does not seem to support any type of video files. As a nice personalization touch, you can set any JPEG image as the wallpaper for the home screen. Connectivity for transferring files onto your desktop or notebook is provided via USB 3.0 micro B port. Only the internal 2.5-inch storage drive is accessible in this mode. You can't move data from the XferMax's media card slots or USB 3 attached devices to your computer, which means the XferMax can't be used as a general-purpose media card reader. Any files that you do want to transfer to your computer must first be transferred to the XferMax's internal 2.5-inch storage drive. Transfer performance to the computer is snappy. I observe sustained transfer rates of around 335 megabytes per second from the internal SSD. The Wi-Fi icon places the XferMax in smartphone mode, creating an ad hoc network for access from their smartphone app. Once connected, you can use the iOS app to browse and navigate through all of the attached storage devices and media cards. The app has a clean, intuitive interface and is relatively responsive. You can use it to move files within the XferMax unit and also to download files from the unit to your smartphone. You can also upload files from your smartphone, such as photos in your phone's camera roll, including an option to sync and upload your entire camera roll to the XferMax. The recovery feature lets you find and recover files that were accidentally deleted on the media cards or files that were lost by an accidental format of the card. I tested this feature by first fully wiping an SD card to clear all remnants of previous files, then placed 155 images onto the card consisting of a mix of Canon and Nikon RAW and JPEGs, then did a quick format of the card to simulate an accidental format. When done, I was able to see all the recovered files copied onto the internal SSD, although there were a few unreadable duplicates. Note that for RAWs, XferMax only supports recovery of the more common types. For example, it didn't support recovery of RAW files from my Olympus E-M5 camera. Settings is a general collection of configuration and utility functions. LCD lets you set 3 levels of display brightness, interestingly labeled brightest, general, and softness. You can also set the power-saving backlight off time with options for 10, 20, and 30 seconds. The backlight turns off in 2 stages. It first dims at the user-configured time interval, then shuts off completely 15 seconds after that. Language lets you set the interface language between English, German, and 2 variants of Chinese. Device info shows file system and capacity information for all attached storage devices and media cards. Smart monitoring statistics is also provided for SSDs and HDDs, which lets you check the ongoing health of those drives. A safely eject option is provided as well, although I usually remove the media without this option with no observed ill effects, provided the media was idle at the time. Finally, there is a mirror option that is not documented in the manual. Running it creates a 64 megabyte file with a .mir extension. I examined the file in a hex editor and it appears to be the first 64 megabytes of the mirror drive, including its partition table. Perhaps they plan to use this file for some type of future recovery feature. Backup setting lets you set the defaults for the preview and folder name options for the backup operations. Firmware displays the current firmware version and also an option for upgrading. The upgrade process is straightforward. Simply copy the firmware file to a media card and then select that file within the firmware update browser. Format HDD lets you format either the internal drive or an external mass storage device connected via the USB port. It does not support formatting media cards. Password on boot lets you restrict access to the device with a password. I'm not sure how useful a security measure this is because the XferMax still lets you access the internal drive without a password via its host USB interface when connected to a computer. There is also no encryption support that might utilize the password as part of an encryption key. Phone transfer lets you set the SSID and password for the ad hoc network the XferMax creates for communication with its smartphone app. Power setting shows the current voltage level of the batteries. You can also set the idle auto shutdown interval of 1, 3, 5, or 10 minutes. Date time sets the internal clock of the XferMax. There doesn't appear to be an internal clock battery, which means if you remove the main batteries while the micro USB power source isn't attached, the date and time will be lost. Reset lets you clear all the user-configured settings on the device. In summary, I found the XferMax to be fast, intuitive, and reliable. My only quibbles are the lack of included USB power supply, a poorly positioned and engineered power switch, and the slow backup performance when the Verify option is used. The major elephant in the room is price. At $499, the XferMax is rather expensive, but then again it stands alone in its versatility, feature set, and performance, so I'll leave it to you to decide whether it represents a good value. Competing products include the Western Digital Passport Wireless Pro, which I presently own and sells for $199, including 4 terabytes of HDD storage. However, the Passport Pro has direct support for SD cards only, and its transfer performance is limited to around 52 megabytes per second. Like the XferMax, the Passport Pro also includes an on-the-go USB port to support additional source devices and card readers, but unfortunately that port is only USB 2.0, yielding transfer rates at around 25 megabytes per second on the Sony XQD 2.0 card reader. Other products, such as the RAVPower File Hub, share that same USB 2.0 speed limitation as the Passport Wireless Pro.